Eala effect and fan base behind me is gonna be funny. She's carrying the crowd, so it's gonna be interesting.
Something strange is happening in New York right now, and almost nobody outside of tennis has noticed it yet. A 21-year-old who has never won a Grand Slam is selling out of merchandise faster than the world's #1. A brand that has spent 3 decades building its empire on American and European superstars just quietly rerouted its entire marketing machine toward a single Southeast Asian face. And somewhere in a WTA locker room, veterans who have spent a decade fighting for exactly this kind of spotlight are watching it land on someone who was, until about a year ago, barely a footnote in their sport. So the question is not whether something is happening. The question is why, and why her, and why now, right before the last Grand Slam of the year. Her name is Alex Eala. Say it slowly because by the end of this you will not stop hearing it. She is Filipino. She is left-handed. And 2 summers ago, she was a name only die-hard tennis fans could place. Today, she is a career-high world number, 18, the first player from the Philippines to ever crack the WTA's upper tier, and the reason Nike's most expensive. Real estate in Flushing Meadows is suddenly wearing royal blue. But here is where it gets interesting because none of this happened the way breakthroughs are supposed to happen. There was no slow, steady climb. There was an explosion, and it started at Wimbledon on a court she was not supposed to still be standing on. She walked in against Iga Swiatek, a defending champion, a player who had beaten bigger names on bigger stages without blinking. Eala was supposed to be the warm-up act. Instead, she walked out the winner, and the tennis world did the thing it always does when it gets caught off guard. It assumed it was a fluke. One big win. One good day. Nothing that changes a career. Except 3 weeks later, she did something no one saw coming twice in a row. She entered the Washington Open with almost no room for error and proceeded to dismantle the draw from the inside out. She took down a former champion. She dominated a former world number 10. She beat a 4-time Grand Slam winner in the semifinal like it was routine. And then in the final, against the world's 3rd-ranked player, she went down a set and looked finished. This is the part where most young players fold. The pressure of a maiden title and opponent who has closed out matches like this 100 times before, a crowd waiting to see if the story was real or just a good weekend. Eala did not fold. She rebuilt the match point by point, closed it out, and became the first Filipina in history to win a WTA Tour title. 5 wins over top 10 opponents. A ranking rocketing from the high 20s into the top 20 almost overnight. And that is where most feel-good sports stories would end, with the trophy, the tears, the flag raised for a nation that had waited generations for a moment like this one. But this story does not end there. This is where it actually starts. Because somewhere between that Wimbledon upset and that Washington final, a decision got made in Beaverton, Oregon, that had nothing to do with rankings points at all. Nike did something it does not do for role players. It built her a signature shirt. Not a template jersey with her name printed on the tag in small type. An actual signature piece, her own design language. Released and sold under her name before some of the sport's biggest stars had anything comparable. Then came the dress. Royal blue, $140. Cut from the same color language as the Philippine national teams in basketball and volleyball, engineered so that every person watching from Manila would recognize exactly what they were looking at before a single point had been played. And then the number that should stop you cold. That dress and the merchandise built around it sold out before the gear belonging to Carlos Alcaraz, before Yannick Sinner, before Aryna Sabalenka. 3 of the biggest names holding Grand Slam trophies and dominating world rankings, and the merchandise shelf that emptied first belonged to a woman ranked outside the top 15. Think about what that actually means. Nike did not stumble into this. Sportswear giants do not gamble signature product lines on hope. They gamble them on data, on engagement numbers, on a read of where the next wave of spending is about to come from. And for the first time in the modern history of tennis marketing, that red pointed toward a country of over 100 million people that had never once been the center of a major sponsor's global strategy. Not Serena's America, not Serena's America, not Sharapova's Russia, not Osaka's Japan. The Philippines, a nation with one of the largest sneaker-buying, jersey-wearing, team-obsessed fan cultures on the planet, and until this year, nobody in global sports marketing had made it the centerpiece of anything. Now picture the position that puts everyone else in. The established stars on that same Nike roster, the ones who spent years building their own brand equity match by match, watching a newer name receive treatment usually reserved for proven champions. Nobody says it out loud. Nobody has to. In a locker room, attention is currency, and currency that moves toward one person is currency that stops moving toward everyone else. That tension does not need a headline to be real. It just needs everyone in the room to be capable of counting. But before you decide this is simply a marketing story, a brand exploiting a moment, remember the part of this that is impossible to manufacture. You cannot buy a comeback from 5-1 down in a deciding tiebreak. You cannot script a run through a bracket stacked with former champions and top 10 killers. The reason Nike is pointing cameras at Alex Eala is because Alex Eala keeps giving them something to point cameras at. Which brings us to the part of the story nobody wants to say too loudly because it complicates the fairy tale. This has not been clean. Weeks after her Wimbledon breakthrough, she walked back onto a Grand Slam court at last year's US Open. The moment the entire tennis world was suddenly watching for the first time. And she lost in the second round to Christina Buxa, a player ranked far below her. It should have been the story that quietly ended the hype. Instead, she went public with it herself, posting something raw and unpolished about how living your dream can still come with days that hurt. Refusing to disappear, refusing to let one bad match become the whole narrative. And then months later, she was lifting a trophy in Washington. That is the pattern that makes this different from a manufactured story. Manufactured stories do not survive real losses. Hers did. Now the stakes get higher, because this season she has done something almost nobody at the top of the sport is doing. She has played more matches than nearly any woman on Tour 54, and counting before the US Open has even started. More than Jessica Pegula, more than Elina Svitolina, more than players who have entire teams built around protecting their bodies for exactly this part of the calendar. She followed her historic Washington title with a run to the third round in Toronto and another deep push through the brutal hard courts of Cincinnati, barely pausing for breath. And then, instead of resting, instead of doing what every sports scientist on her team would beg her to do, she agreed to play a high-profile exhibition against a dangerous young rival at Arthur Ashe Stadium days before the tournament actually begins. And on top of that, a mixed doubles event alongside one of the men's tour's most recognizable stars. Insiders inside the sport have already started calling it a gamble, a scheduling risk that could leave her running on empty exactly when the pressure peaks hardest. So here is the tension sitting underneath every royal blue billboard and every sold-out shirt. Nike has built a campaign around a body that has not stopped moving all year. The commercial says superstar. The schedule says something closer to a countdown. And nobody, not the marketing team in Oregon, not the fans in Manila refreshing their phones every morning, not Eala herself, actually knows yet which version of this story New York is about to write. Because here is what almost nobody is saying plainly enough. This was never just a tennis story, and it was never just a marketing story either. It is the story of a brand and an athlete making the exact same bet at the exact same time, without either one of them being sure it will pay off. Nike is betting that a movement is bigger than a ranking, that 100 million people who have never had a global tennis face of their own will show up for merchandise, for viewership, for a level of attention that turns one athlete into an entire market. Eala is betting something far more personal, that her body can keep absorbing match after match after match without breaking exactly when the cameras are the brightest they have ever been. 2 bets, 1 outcome, and it all comes due in the same 2 weeks. If she goes deep in New York, if that exhibition and that mixed doubles gamble and that exhausting summer somehow do not catch up with her, this stops being a marketing story completely. It becomes the origin story people replay for years. The exact moment a nation without a tennis icon suddenly got one. The moment a brand's boldest bet in years looked less like a gamble and more like the only correct read on where the sport was actually heading. But if the schedule wins, if the fatigue that every insider has already flagged catches up with her in the second week, in front of the exact audience Nike spent a year building toward her, then all of this, the signature shirt, the royal blue dress, the billboards, the sold-out shelves become something else. A warning about what happens when a growth strategy outruns the athlete it is built around. That is the real question hanging over Flushing Meadows right now. Bigger than seeding, bigger than draws, bigger than any single opponent she might face. Is Alex Eala already the superstar the merchandise says she is? Or is she still becoming one in real time under more pressure than any 21-year-old should reasonably be asked to carry? The fans in Manila already believe they know the answer. The executives in Beaverton are betting millions that they are right. The veterans in that locker room are watching, calculating, waiting to see if the spotlight was a preview or a mistake. And the only person who can actually settle it is the one person standing on the court when the lights come on, wearing a $140 dress the color of a flag that has waited its entire history for a moment exactly like this one. New York will decide. It always does. It always does.